Everyone, and welcome. So excited to have you all here. I am Christina DeRose. I'm the director of Kresge Arts in Detroit, and I'm excited to welcome you on behalf of our program, which is generously funded by the Kresge Foundation and administered by the College for Creative Studies. My pronouns are she, her, or they, theirs are also fine. And I want to also note that we've got a couple folks helping out today from the tech side of things, which include Andrea Ulapoti and also Layla by Go Rich. This is the second of the series of artist salons happening that's focused on the 2020 Kresge Artist Fellows. We are recording today's session, so feel free to go on video mute. Just turn off your video if you prefer to engage that way. We're so glad that you're joining us virtually to learn about 3 of the 2020 Kresge Artist Fellows today: Paige Wood, Andrew Morton, and Brandon Walley. Each of whom are here waving at you on the screen. You're going to get to learn more about their practices and also engage in a chat with them today, which will be facilitated just to keep things moving along and get as many questions and as much of their voice into the mix as possible. Please do drop, if you haven't already, information about where you're coming from, anything about you're joining us today, as well as your name and your pronouns in the chat. And also, I know some of you who are on here are Kresge Artist Fellows from other years or award recipients from the program for other years also. So please feel free to share that also. And so today, again, is a live art salon. And we have with us, in addition to the folks I already mentioned, 2 ASL interpreters, Laura, and you'll also, I think, see Michelle at some point today. Thank you very much to both of them for supporting. And the intros again, and also sharing your questions throughout the chat, those really are what bring the connection to this series. And of course, connection is something that's really very missing these days. Thankfully, we're able to have the support of technology and to join in the midst of a pandemic, but it is obviously not the same as being in a room together. However, being in a space where chats are possible, where all of you are engaging as participants, sharing questions, will really make sure that this session is as connected as it can be. And again, sharing where you're coming from, et cetera, it really does make a big difference in terms of having the artists and all of us have a sense of who's in the room, even when it's virtual. So thank you again for participating in that throughout. I'm going to quickly explain the format that's happening today, just so you have the lay of the land, what we're doing, and then we're going to dive right into it. So as I mentioned, this series is showcasing and advancing the creative practice of the 2020 Kresge Artist Fellows. Today, there are 3 folks. We'll begin with a 10-minute presentation. And that will, the order we're going in today is Andrew, then Paige, then Brandon. So there'll be a 10-minute presentation by the first artist, then a moderated Q&A, then the second artist, Q&A, and then the third, and we'll hopefully have a little time at the end for perhaps like questions for everyone. We'll see how that all goes. Along the way, if you are experiencing any issues with your Zoom connection, Layla is the person to reach out to, and that's tech support. You'll see in the chat, you can chat to Layla directly. And then any questions, please don't feel like you need to wait until the very end. You're welcome to drop questions in the chat at any point, and actually that helps things go along really well, because then we can sort of filter them out and dive right into it when we get to the conversation portion, and you don't have to try to hold on to your question and remember it later. So with that, if you have immediate questions, feel free to share them. And we are going to go ahead right now and dive right in. And so I'm going to hand it off to you, Andrew. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Chris. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Andrew Morton. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a playwright and theater maker. The video that you're about to see is a short video of me talking a little bit more about my approach to playwriting and theater making. You'll hear me talk about a few specific projects that have been favorites of mine that I've made over the last 2 years. And then the sort of second part of my video includes a short excerpt of a project that I'm currently working on called Sofa Stories. It's a monologue-based piece. So the excerpt you'll see is just the first part of the piece, not the entire piece. But I will be happy to share more about that project and provide information if you'd like to see the entire film of that monologue later on, I can provide that information for you. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and please enjoy my video.
Hello, my name is Andrew Morton, and I'm honored to be one of the 2020 Kresge Artist Fellows. I'm a playwright and theatre maker, and I describe most of the work I do as socially engaged theatre, making theatre with and for vulnerable populations, or working with people and communities who might not consider themselves to be artists, using theatre as a way to explore issues of shared concern, or perhaps explore and amplify stories that are important to them. The work I do often takes place outside of traditional performance spaces or institutions, and as an artist, I'm particularly interested in how theatre can be used as a way to encourage conversations and dialogue, and perhaps even advocate for change. I'm grateful that as an artist, I've had the opportunity to work in a variety of communities and contexts. And to give you a better sense of the type of work I do, I thought I would describe just a few favorite projects of mine that I've worked on with communities in the past. I'm from the UK originally, and when I lived in London for a period, I worked mostly with young people, using theatre as a way to explore issues that were of concern to them. I would then devise original pieces with those young people, and we would produce and tour these plays to schools and community centres and other venues across the city, presenting the play, but then also using it as an opportunity to have a conversation about those particular issues and how they affected members in the audience. Prior to moving to Detroit a few years ago, I lived and worked in Flint, Michigan, a community that continues to have a significant impact on my artistic practice. And while I lived and worked in Flint, I created many projects that I'm very proud of. A couple I used documentary theatre techniques, or sometimes called verbatim theatre, to document particular issues or events that happened in the community. One was a play called Embers, which documented one particular summer where there was a significant increase in arson fires across the city. We interviewed many community residents and local folks connected to that story, and then performed the piece in gardens, church parking lots, and a variety of other spaces across the city. A couple years later, I did another documentary theatre piece, this time exploring the state-mandated emergency manager legislation that was forced upon the city of Flint and many other cities in Michigan at the time, and now many people accept was one of the reasons that led up to the Flint water crisis. Also inspired by the people and communities I worked with in Flint, I wrote an original play called Bloom that explores the impact of urban gardening on young people experiencing grief and loss, and that play is probably one of my most proud artistic accomplishments of my career so far. More recently, though, here in Detroit, I have been working with caregivers of people living with dementia, using theatre and improvisational storytelling techniques as a way to improve communication between them and their loved ones. I'm also doing a lot of work with young people who have experienced homelessness or housing insecurity, and using theatre as a way and a tool to engage them. And so it's that last work that I would particularly like to focus on with this presentation today. The project that I'm currently working on is called Sofa Stories Detroit, which is a community arts project using theatre and digital media to amplify the stories of young Detroiters who have experienced homelessness or housing insecurity. I'm currently working with a fantastic small team of artists who are helping me create a series of short monologues written in collaboration with young people from the Detroit Phoenix Center, who is the community partner on this project, and I'm incredibly grateful to be working with them. Recognizing that couch surfing is one way that many young people in housing crisis navigate their world, the project uses a sofa as a sort of linking image or connecting thread of sorts between all of the stories. And our hope is to bring these performances to a variety of outdoor spaces in Detroit later this summer, where one audience member at a time will experience a monologue performed by a local actor sat on a sofa placed in a variety of public spaces. So I'd like to end this presentation by sharing a brief excerpt from one of the monologues that we've created as part of this project. But before we do that, the last thing I'd like to say is that I believe stories have power, and theatre can provide a wonderful platform to share those stories and then reflect on our lives and the lives of others. At its best, I think theatre can remind us of what we should celebrate in life, but also what we should desire to change. So thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you on behalf of myself and the other artists, and I hope that you will enjoy this excerpt from Sofa Stories.
right now, I feel really lucky. I have a roof over my head and a place to sleep right here on this sofa, actually. I've been staying with my friend Ash for a few months now. I was worried at first. Ash and I have been good friends for a long time, but I thought living together might change that, especially since I'm sleeping in their living room. I thought they'd find me really annoying, or I'd just be in the way all the time, but so far it's been fine. And I'm just really grateful to have a friend that I can rely on. Although, I think my other housemate, Sally, has hated me since day one. Maybe it's because she thinks I took her bed, the couch, that is. Well, Sally is Ash's cat, like Sally from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Well, Ash and I are huge fans. It's actually one of the first things we bonded over. Yeah, we met about 2 years ago, I think. Around that time, I was working in a coffee shop, and Ash would come in a lot. And one day they complimented me on one of my tattoos, a semicolon on my wrist. Yeah, I got it when I was young, but Ash recognized it immediately and showed me their own on their forearm. So, I knew right then we had a connection. And we just started chatting more and more every time they came to the shop and hanging out a bit, and then we just became inseparable. We've never been anything more than friends. Neither of us are really each other's type, but since we've been living together, we joke that we'd actually make a pretty good old married couple. When I told Ash I was worried about my housing situation, I swear with no hesitation, they offered me a place to stay, on the spot. And I don't like to be a burden on people, especially a good friend. I would hate for something to get in the way of what we have. But Ash just doesn't make me feel like that. So, yeah, like I said, I just feel really, really lucky.
All right, reminder, place your questions, comments, thoughts for Andrew in the chat at any point. I'd like to start out by inviting you to comment on a rather, in some ways, I think, obvious question that's going to be, the impact on your practice of this past year. But I'm curious about it from this space of thinking about some things that you mentioned in terms of like celebration and also desire for change, and whether there's anything that might relate to that you're seeing specifically in the past year or through the lens of your work and the individuals that you're working with in the theater pieces and more that you're creating.
Yeah, thank you. I think particularly with the Sofa Stories project, that has been a challenge to sort of be producing that work right now, but also in some ways, when I had sort of originally planned this project and it got funding from the Knight Foundation in late 2019, I had always sort of pitched it as a performance that eventually would happen outdoors and be sort of smaller performances. So in that regard, it feels like this is still a project that hopefully we can do in this strange year, where I know myself and many other people whose medium is theater, or that live performance experience, which is very challenging and at times perhaps inappropriate to do right now. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that we can still do a version of this project in some way later this year, and still taking sort of appropriate measures to protect both the actors and creative team and audience members as well. So in that regard, I feel lucky that I've had this project to sort of work on, and not feel that there's necessarily been a significant pause on my creative practice. And then being able to kind of still find new and different ways to engage with the population that we're working with on this project. Again, I mentioned in the video, I'm very, very fortunate to have an incredible community partner on this project, the Detroit Phoenix Center. So last year was a great moment for me in terms of realizing that I couldn't do certain things on this project, but what I could do was continue to support the great work of the Phoenix Center and amplify the work they were doing, particularly in the very early days of the pandemic here in Detroit, to support young people who were already in a very vulnerable situation, and those situations were just exacerbated by the pandemic, right? So to be able to kind of still find ways to connect with them virtually, compensate them for their time as well, and provide them with direct payments was really important. And then in some of the conversations that I've been having with that population, trying to find with this project a real balance in celebrating stories of resilience and survival, and people kind of overcoming incredible odds, but at the same time recognizing there are many aspects of this larger issue that the details are not pretty, and we should sort of face the fact that there are many young people who, again, even during the last year, there's a monologue I'm working on as part of this project about a young person who's in college who gets that 48 hours notice to vacate their dorm and doesn't have a support system to take care of them. So there are aspects of the piece that are hopefully shedding light on that, and I hope that will bring a greater sense of awareness to that, the fact that youth homelessness is often quite an invisible crisis, and it can impact young people in various places in society, people in high school, college, all walks of life, right? So finding that balance again of like celebrating the stories of survival and resilience, but also acknowledging the darker, grimmer aspects of this crisis is something we're trying to explore with this piece, and still trying to be, cautiously optimistic that we can produce it in some way this year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely makes sense. Yeah. So I'm seeing some questions coming up in the chat. So one that's here is, how do you choose what stories that you want to turn into theater? And then just to combine that, because I think it goes with the second one as well, would you speak about your recruitment process? How do you go about working with the Phoenix Center to recruit young people who are willing to share their stories?
Yeah, so that first question in terms of how I choose what stories I'm interested in, it varies. Sometimes it's what like pisses me off, what I'm really angry about. That project I mentioned, the documentary piece I did about the emergency manager legislation, was like trying to make the most unsexy like issue a little bit more interesting or engaging, and thinking, hey, if we maybe made a play about this, might there be a larger conversation about this incredibly draconian and racist law that was impacting Flint and other cities at the time. So there was a lot of sort of anger that kind of motivated that piece. And then other projects, it's very different. Bloom, I mentioned, was a piece that was inspired very much by my time living and working in Flint, and also drew from many of my own personal experiences. And in that regard, when I've worked on many projects about Flint, and that piece came at a time where I was really interested in telling a different story than the primarily narrative that we hear about cities like Flint. And I would add Detroit to that as well. And I think of that as really like a love song to Flint and the people and communities living there. So again, it depends on what sort of inspires me. Again, quite often it's what sort of pisses me off, or what I'm interested in, sort of hoping that there could be some change around, whether that's attitude change, policy change even. And then the second question I think was about recruitment process, particularly for this current project. Again, I'm very happy to be working with such an amazing community partner who recognizes the kind of role of the arts in the larger type of services that they provide to vulnerable young people. That is something that I think is really important, because I believe that opportunities to make art and explore your own story, but also just sometimes be silly and not talk about like the heavy stuff and just play, is something that is often not made accessible to young people in sort of crisis situations. So working with the Phoenix Center, I really sort of look to them in terms of the young people that they already have a relationship with who might want to participate in this work. I'm definitely not interested in exploiting anyone's story, and the trying to find ways of working with young people that want to work with us, feel like they would get something from this work. Finding ways to support them and compensate them financially as well for the work that we're doing together. I mean, really, I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to work with the project, but leaning on, again, the expertise and relationships that the Phoenix Center has, I think has made the project that I'm working on right now successful so far. So.
And there's a question here specifically about the fact that you work with a span of folks of different ages, but that what about the youth voices is such a draw for you? And you've certainly said some things about that, but I just want to check in and see if there's more that you'd like to add.
I'm not really sure. The majority of my sort of professional work as a teaching artist and even as someone sort of making work for younger audience as well has been with younger people. It's really only in the last few years that I've sort of I began working more with older adults as well through my work with an organization called TimeSlips. And I love young people. I love spending time with them. I love a lot of the work that I'll sometimes do is not necessarily focused on a product, working towards a performance. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just having that kind of like little breakthrough of if you're working with young people to, help them overcome certain issues and gain some confidence. I definitely get a huge kick out of that. I'm working right now with another group connected to an organization I've worked with for a long time here in Michigan called the NS Center for Children. It's a foster care agency, and they have an incredible art therapy program. And I've taught theater classes as part of that program for a long time, working alongside art therapists. And I was just working with a group of 5 young people in Flint last night, doing a project around superheroes and just their imaginations and the amazing stuff they come up with about a villain that is Toby the evil enchilada, who got his superpowers from eating some like tainted street meat. So as a storyteller, like I get inspired by the sublime and ridiculousness of stories that young people create when they don't necessarily have the filter or the maybe some of the self-awareness that like adults have. So lots of things I love about working with young people, but I'd add even the work that I do with older adults right now. So much of it is like tapping into the inner sort of child in everyone and that sort of innate nature to play and to imagine and to wonder. And I think so many grown-ups lose that ability as they get older. And I think also society kind of sadly beats that out of us often. So now I don't necessarily think of my work with older adults as that different from the work with young people. It feels quite connected in terms of trying to connect to that inner creative being in every person.
Yeah, and hearing your answers, I love that what it feels like it comes through for me as a theme is meeting people where they are and also engaging with experts. So you as the expert in your particular process and the creativity, but collaborating really authentically and thoroughly with folks who have experts in whatever focus area might also be a part of the piece and highlighting that work. So there's another comment and question here that says, I love the possible situatedness of this piece, making the story or truth visible in neighborhoods, on the street. Hard to avoid a sofa in the middle of an intersection or in the middle of the street. It's hard to avoid. That said, who's an ideal or the audience? Is it an awareness piece for anyone who's crossing the street or walking by in that situation? Or is this for policymakers or something different?
Great question. I'm asking myself that a lot right now. And I think it's changed a little bit from when I originally sort of imagined this project. Early on, I thought that it might have that kind of guerrilla aspect of kind of street theater, that it might just be a pop-up in a place where we would come across audience members by sort of accident and sort of randomly attract an audience. Because of the times we're living in, I don't think that's the direction I'm going to go in, and I want to make sure that we can sort of have some control of how many audience members sort of come through the process. So it will probably be, I imagine, maybe a little bit more of a traditional audience. I'm hoping that people who are really hungry for like live theater and have not had opportunities to experience that would be interested in this work. Also people that are sort of connected to this world of youth homelessness. I think there's definitely a large aspect of the work that I hope will be raising awareness to this often invisible crisis, as I mentioned. But I'm glad that you mentioned like policymakers in there as well, because that's something that I feel I've done in the past with work that has, I feel I've had conversations with similar theater makers, artists who do similar work, where their writing or their pieces might have a particular political or sort of social justice issue explored in them. And sometimes the work, like the audience that comes to see it are the people that already like know and think about those things, and it makes them feel good watching the play. But then does that really make any difference in the larger world? I don't really know. So for this piece, I am having conversations with, again, our community partners and experts about how to weave in current issues about like policies, like are there particular policies around youth homelessness that we could actually advocate for change through storytelling. So I'm hoping that in that sense too, this piece could attract those kind of audience members, sort of adapting as well and thinking that this piece will be hopefully that live theatrical experience and filmed sort of aspect as well. My hope too is that even if people don't experience the piece in its sort of live setting, the films that we'll make could serve as a great resource for the Detroit Phoenix Center to perhaps use as part of their resources when they are speaking to potential funders or people in legislature that could sort of advocate for this policy change. So it's not just one audience. I'm hoping that we can sort of attract many, and we'll see what happens, I guess.
All right, and I think also just as we're going to wrap up the Q&A here for now, and we'll shift gears, but I do want to note that, you know, in hearing you say sometimes folks in the audience might be those who are already like, yes, I agree with the perspective that you're bringing, but there's always more that even those of us who are bringing that perspective can do. This seems like such an important time, even if we receive something where we're like, I agree with you, and I'm upset, or I agree with you, that we don't just walk away and say, so that's enough. But that every one of us continues to look for how we make the world that each of us deserves, not just agree that we deserve change, but how do we step up and step into making that happen. So thank you for your work and for sharing so generously. I also want to thank Tyler for the question, as well as Amy and Decky and Noreen for sharing the questions. And note that we do have one more there that's in the chat if you want to take a look. Andrew, you might want to respond to it, or we'll try to get to it at the end, but I also want to make sure we shift gears. And now it's my pleasure to hand the virtual mic over to Paige. So take it away.
Oh, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Paige Wood, pronouns she, her, hers. I am unofficially doing the Rock cosplay, so I apologize for that. But I am a multimedia producer and storyteller based here in Detroit. The video you're about to see is really just an about me, about what my work is really trying to address, as well as some snippets, some visual snippets of what that looks like. And also looking at some of my own personal work and what I try to bring to the stories I'm trying to tell. So it's a mix between a whole bunch of things and also an answer as to why my YouTube career would never take off. But yeah, hope you all enjoy it. Hi, my name is Paige Wood. I'm a 2020 Kresge Film Fellow, and welcome to my Virtual Artist Salon, aka my kitchen. When asked about what I do, a lot of people assume that I'm just a filmmaker and screenwriter, but I would say the truth is a bit more complex than that. I see myself as a multimedia storyteller whose work is across a variety of different genres and mediums. And to that end, I've realized that over the years that a lot of my work is at the intersection of race and place, and attempting to ask or answer, in some essence, a very pointed question. That being, how can we use narrative to either reveal and or subvert perspectives on what we think to be fixed, inevitable, or impossible to change. Now, this creative mindset isn't something I arrived to or woke up with overnight by any means, but rather it's something that's been developed, a framework really, that I've evolved through my work with Black and Brown creatives, both in the city and abroad, as well as grassroots organizations and just people of lived experiences, to really learn how to tell stories that are both transformational, liberatory, and also compelling. I would credit the Detroit Narrative Agency, aka DNA, shout out to y'all, Firelight Media, as well as my work with the Rides Home Stories Project, as the most pivotal moments in my sort of creative life so far in helping to develop this framework. In my 3 years as a freelance creative, I've worked across a variety of mediums, including but not limited to short form, narrative and documentary film, animation, web series, video games, and now even children's books, which is highly ironic, mostly because I vastly prefer cats over kids. But in any case, rather than just tell you about what I've worked on and what I'm currently working on, I also want to show you what that looks like. So cue montage. Femme Queen Chronicles, a web series pilot about 4 Black trans women navigating love, life, shade, and trade in the city of Detroit. Directed by Aya Simone, produced by Paige Wood, co-written by Aya Simone and Paige Wood. Writing with Aunt D. A radically imaginative short film about a disillusioned Detroit artist struggling to ground herself mentally while fighting back against what may or may not be figments of her own imagination. Directed by Bree Gantz, produced by Paige Wood and Hania Cross, co-written by Bree Gantz and Paige Wood. The Giverny Document, a multi-textured cinematic poem that mediates on the safety and bodily autonomy of Black women. Directed, edited, and animated by Jatavia Gary. Produced by Paige Wood, Artesia Balthrop, and Jatavia Gary. The Rise Home Stories Project, a groundbreaking multimedia collaboration bringing together emerging and established storytellers with grassroots advocates working at the nexus of housing, land, and racial justice in the U.S. to reimagine the past, present, and future of our communities by transforming the stories we tell about land and home. This initiative is led by Jolu Productions, Working Films, and Paige Wood as supervising producer. And scene. So yeah, that's a bit of a taste of what I've worked on and what I'm currently working on. And in terms of where to go from here, I would say that's a really good question that I don't yet have an answer to. But I would say the sky's the limit. At least for this year, I'm going to take the time to really start developing some of my own personal ideas and bringing them to life. As a storyteller, I write genre scripts, whether they're urban fantasies, high fantasies, or even sci-fi, that look at our society and what we see as our norms, as well as centering Black women just as the protagonists of these types of stories. I would say my goal ultimately is to just tell stories that show how weird, funny, extraordinary, and ultimately multidimensional Black women are. And that is whether they're Black witches, Black superheroes, or even Black supervillains. Basically, I would say the sort of writing philosophy that I live by is the fact that weird shit doesn't just happen to white people. So in terms of my own personal work, I have 2 scripts that I've written and I'm currently trying to develop that are both in some ways a love letter to my love for animation, anime, and also nostalgia for my own childhood. The first of which being a script called Heavy Flow, which is an award-winning supernatural comedy short script that's basically a teen sleepover that goes awry once someone suggests a scare contest to get the blood pumping. And the second script is called Mortal Kombat, like comb. And it's an animated short script that looks at a Black woman's pushback against her hairstylist suggestion to bump the ends, which, look, if you're a Black girl who's ever been in a salon and has some trauma against hot combs and flat irons, then you get it. So yeah, those are kind of the ideas that are coming out of my head. And if you're a funder, if you are a creative, or if you're just someone who wants to be a part of something dope, yeah, hit your girl up at the address that I'm going to edit in here. So to end this video, I just want to leave you all with two quotes. The first of which being from author Toni Morrison, which is, "What's the world for you if you can't make it up the way you want it?" And the second being from rapper Meg Thee Stallion. And that's, "I'm a hot girl and I do hot shit." Thank you. That music was kind of much. Didn't realize that when I edited it.
I love that. There are themes that I'm feeling that I'm going to stop and hope we will have time at the end of some things coming through. But I want to focus really first on you and what you just shared, Paige, and check in. Similar question to where we kicked off before in terms of working in the conditions that you're working in now. However you may want to take that question, what are the ways that you see your work being able to move forward specifically in terms of saying, here's the support that's there for me, here's where I want my work to be seen, and here's what can help me get from here to there with the stories and the perspectives that you're sharing, which are critically important to be shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the reality of the conditions we are now, a lot of my work is from home, in right here in front of my kitchen. And so I would say one thing I've been blessed with sort of the larger scale projects, thinking of, say, the Rise Home Stories project, which is going to be released in summer of 2021. I think the support there is just kind of the readiness and presentness of community, whether we're meeting virtually or as much as we can, despite conditions. And really, you know, what support looks like for me, at least at this point in time, just because a lot of stuff is either in production or about to be released, is just showing up, supporting, checking it out, because unfortunately, for better or worse, you know, this is going to be our reality for a long time.
I'm just going to add to that also for funders who may be watching or otherwise, money, because it's expensive to make multimedia work. It's also expensive to make live theater as well. So I'm just going to say across the board, this is true for all artists, but in this moment, it's speaking specifically to the type of work where we're in this Q&A right now. It's expensive. It's very expensive to make the work. So that is one critical way of supporting as well, is to make sure that the work can keep being made. So we've got a couple questions already in the chat. One is, how exactly do you start writing scripts? And also, what advice can you recommend for people who enjoy making, in this case, film, but struggle with making the script for the story that they want to portray?
It's a good question. Also, hey, T. You know, it's weird. I get a lot of my script ideas from driving, being in the car, just listening to music. I was definitely that kid who, you know, something plays and I'm looking out the window wistfully, just like thinking of music videos in my head. And so when it comes to like putting pen to paper and making that a script, you know, my baseline is kind of just figuring like, what's the story I want to start with? And then what do I want to end with? And I can make everything else up in there as it goes. But if I at least have that starting edge and what looks like a vague end, I can do with it what I will. So, you know, if you're someone at least who like wants to start telling their own stories or wants to start exploring screenwriting, but may or may not have that type of experience, you know, one thing I would just say is like, yeah, just start putting bullet points down of like, well, I just want this to happen, and by the end, I want my character to be here. And I think for most screenwriters or anyone else who has written a script, you know, they would agree where it's kind of like, if we have that framework, if we have that foundation, you can build it out as you go. Yeah, I don't know. I also just watch a lot of movies. I watch a lot of movies and TV. So you can get a lot of just ideas of narratives to unfold, or what you want to explore by watching good movies, by watching bad movies, by watching reality TV. All media, I think, is good media when you're trying to tell a story.
So another question that came in also is, I noticed a number of the projects are collaborative. How do you determine who you want to work with, and how do you find them, in addition to or including Detroit Narrative Agency? And I just want to do a quick note too, that some of the folks that were mentioned, those collaboratives, are also Kresge Artist Fellows, or folks who may be coming up in the future. You can learn more information about on the website too. So how do you select your collaborators?
They select me. Yeah, in the case of Detroit Narrative Agency, it was really a case of giving me a call one day from a previous connection of ours, and just saying, hey, do you want to do this dope thing? And I was like, hell yeah. And so that's honestly a lot of how either I've come to my work or I've come to work with those who I collaborate with. It's a matter of both understanding and seeing that there's a really cool and compelling story being told, and message wise that it aligns with my values and what I hold, in addition to, you know, really thinking about who is this for. So with, I would say, all the cases of the films that I've been a part of, you know, Black women have definitely been major intended audience, which is obviously a huge plus for me. But even thinking more broadly, when I'm just thinking about community, the question also is not just for visibility's sake or engagement's sake, who does this benefit, but how does it benefit them? Because visibility is not enough. So beyond that, what's the impact that's being left, or what's the impact we can continue to generate in addition to, say, telling a story through whatever medium? You know, I think projects that have those extended elements where the story and the work can be almost evergreen in a way, you know, that those are the ones that I always find myself most drawn to, as well as most rewarding.
So also have someone noting here that was amazing. All of your projects sound incredible. Would you be willing to speak more to how you arrived at your creative mindset? Your approach to creating and narratives are transformative, which offers so much to the present moment and also to the future. And then I'm just going to partner that with another question that came in. As a writer, director, producer, what role do you prefer, and what determines who you choose to partner with? So you've spoken a little to those, but I think, again, putting all those two questions together for you. Yeah,
no problem. I can start with Amy's question. That's a hard one. I would say, like, I definitely love to write. That would be my first love and how I got into all of this. Producing is something I know how to do, just for someone who wears multiple hats and isn't afraid to make emails. I don't like them, but I can make them. And then directing is kind of like, how do you hold this when we're in a matter of production, and just keeping the vision on track or in line with what you've always imagined. So I would say my sort of loves are definitely writing, and I'm new to directing, but also loving it as well. Producing is both a means to an end, but it's also the one that connects me with the most people. So it's I would say it's a soft third, but definitely, the love is shared across all roles. And in terms of my creative mindset, I think that if we were to go way, way back, it definitely starts with like the fact that I was a lover of animation, still am to this day, cartoons, anime, you name it. And I just thought there was always this irony as a kid where, if there's any genre where anything is possible, it's definitely animation. And yet somehow, even in the most genred films or, sci-fi, fantasy, all that, like Black people are still the minority. That's the logic isn't logicking for me, like, especially if you have aliens and Black people are still nowhere to be seen. So with that, I always had this idea of being like, well, I rebuke that. We can tell these stories, we can, and we can have these same things happen to us in a way that's fun, in a way that's light and offers us joy in the same way. It's not just Black faces and white spaces. But also to that end, if we think about the more liberatory and civic media aspect of that work, it's also noting that, like, throughout my experience, and it's very short, if I'm being honest, as an emerging creative, just understanding also that the current systems we have don't work. And so how is that also part of my storytelling ethos, to create something that is, or be a part of creating something that is reflective of the change we need to make and the change that's possible.
Right, a couple other questions here. One is, what does being based in Detroit give you as a creator as opposed to being on the coast? Specifically, they're calling out New York or LA. And then also, how do you find yourself across genres, and how do you pick the best medium for a piece?
Yeah, for sure. So I think with being based in Detroit, the biggest thing I've found is love and support from a genuine place and community in that way. I've had a brief stint in LA and I understand New York in a vague way, but I found it to be fairly cannibalistic in this way where they're quote unquote industry cities, even though I hate that term. So, it's a lot of folks who are basically on top of each other to get the same thing. And in this way where only those at the top can really succeed. And, I do think in some ways the Detroit creative scene has its own complications, but at least I can say from my perspective and the folks that I hold dear here, it's really a, if someone eats, everybody eats type of thing where, if I'm coming up, you're coming up with me. At least that's how I live by my life. And so I found just kind of the reward in this way of like, and that's not to say I couldn't have found it in LA or New York, but I don't have to look twice or look behind my back to wonder, what someone's doing. I know everyone who's with me is with me, and for the right reasons. And I feel genuine in that love. And then in terms of how I found myself across genres, or how do I pick the best medium for a piece, it's really a question about audience. So if I think about Rise Home, which is definitely the most varied genre sort of initiative I've done, where the multimedia piece consists of a video game, two podcasts, a children's book, and an animated web series. We had different intended audiences for each of those projects. And with the topics that were being told, for example, the video game is looking at redlining in Detroit and the history of the choices that a lot of Black families have been left with when it comes to housing, and basically questioning how you may have ended up legacy-wise and where you are today just based off of those policies. That's not really fun if it's say just a straightforward documentary, if our audience is 18 to 25-year-olds. But a way to make that actually engaging would be to make that a video game, or at least that's how we thought about it. And so, yeah, I would say audience is definitely a big factor in playing how things end up medium wise. And then for my own personal stories, I'm always going to lend to making something either animated or very animation inspired.
So last question that we have for you here at the moment is, I loved your video so much. That's obviously not a question. That's a statement that I know many people are sharing, myself included, in addition to Olivia, who's sharing this, and the rock outfit. Are there any specific artists, films, TV shows that are currently inspiring your work?
That's a good question. I always shout out a sadly canceled show, but one of my favorites, Pushing Daisies, artistically is always going to be one of my faves. In terms of anime, of course, there's Utena. Slayers is an anime from the 90s, which is one of my top, if not one of my top references of all time. And in terms of movies, you know, it's funny. This question came up in another conversation of mine, and I really think this just shows where my taste level is. But Josie and the Pussycats, the one from the 2000s, can quote it every day, listen to the soundtrack every day, as well as Into the Spider-Verse. I think that's a very beautiful movie, one of my favorites of recent, as well as anything by Hayao Miyazaki. So his works, Studio Ghibli, all great.
Got it. Thank you for that, for sharing. Stick around. We're going to, of course, have one more presentation and then hopefully some time for group Q&A at the end. Also want to just note that for anyone who isn't already looking, in order to make sure like who's making the media that we're all consuming, looking to make sure that on that list are women of color, are Black women, in telling those stories, that it's something that all of us can do to look and see what can we do to support individuals, to make sure that there's more out there, as well as hearing stories directly from individuals that can influence our perspectives and our lives in a space that is through the entertainment, because it shapes so much of how we see the world. So thank you, Paige, for sharing. And also one quick housekeeping detail, which is at the top. I noted Michelle would be our second interpreter, but I'm seeing it looks as though that is Joan. So I want to say thank you, Joan, for being here. We're going to take a 5-minute bio break, and then we will be back and pick up for the third artist. And then we will have again another Q&A and a group Q&A. So thanks for sticking around. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Won't you please?
All right, looks like we are back. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. And just want to note again, if you joined us after the start, feel free to introduce yourself also via the chat. Let us know where what your name is, your pronouns, where you're coming from, so we can also help build community in this time where we're doing so many things virtually and can connect and show up for one another in all the ways that do remain possible and that are so critical, as we've already heard from the two artists so far, to artists being supported and making their work. There's the formal structures, and then there's the informal, how do we just get it done, and how do we show up for one another to make sure that critical work gets made, even while systems are broken or are not as abundant as the world should have them be. With that, it's my pleasure to turn this over now to Brandon to give a little bit of context about what we're about to see next in terms of sharing your work.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and a big thank you to Kresge Arts in Detroit for this opportunity. Thank you, Andrew and Paige, for sharing your amazing and varied work, and to everyone else for joining. I'd like to preface the video by saying that I chose to basically show montage of some of my past work, clips from a handful of them, I believe about 6. I thought that would be the best way to kind of express the type of films that I make and the genres that I work within. And there is also a couple of videos in there too. I primarily shoot on film and work with celluloid, both kind of the materiality of it, as well as shooting in a camera. But because of the pandemic the past year, I've kind of verged into more of maybe video art type work. And I've included a couple snippets of that project in this reel too. So I think I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to having a discussion with you after. Thanks.
Having let go of the distraction, we return our attention to the primary object or the feeling of the breath. Some of the thoughts and feelings that come are fantastic, they're fascinating, they're delightful. Some might make us uncomfortable. Some are kind of surprising, some are pretty dull. We practice letting them all go without judging them, without disparaging ourselves for what we're experiencing, without condemning ourselves. We let go and we bring our attention back. This ability to let go and begin again is the crucial step in becoming more centered and more present. Almost immediately we feel the healing power of being able to begin again. No matter where our attention has gone or for how long, nothing's ruined, nothing's lost. We can always begin again. Everyone who meditates, both complete beginners, long-term practitioners, gets hijacked by thoughts and feelings. It's just impossible not to. But it's completely possible to start over. Wherever we've gone, we can begin again. It's not a sign of failure. It's not remedial practice. This is the practice. This ability to let go and begin again is the kind of fruit that we take into our ordinary life.
sit together to meditate, to quiet ourselves. Sometimes it's for a little spiritual uplift or new perspective or a little fix, or sometimes it's just to get in touch with our own bodies or our hearts. Sometimes it's to remember, as you sit quietly, that there's a bigger picture. You remember that famous Ojibwa saying, sometimes I go about pitying myself when all the while I'm being carried by great winds across the sky. Our lives are really mysterious, and we actually don't know where they're going and what will happen. You have some ideas about it, but you can't be sure what's going to happen tomorrow. Really, for you or the people you love or people around. There's a woman named Margot Weiss, who created what's called the Salt Monument in Colorado. She had this beautiful wooden kind of temple roof built, and in the middle of it is a lucite, transparent crystal that's suspended on its points and rotates every 24 hours in a circle. And it's filled with 7.83 billion crystals of salt, one for each person on Earth.
Same thing again. And I want you to follow the same exact kind of pattern. You locate yourself, you make a picture, and then you fill it in by using the senses.
All right, reminder for everyone to drop questions, reflections, etc. in the chat. We've already got one here. Awesome. Brandon, loved seeing the new work. And I see a question right here already, so I'm going to go with that, which is, do you consider your work in a particular tradition or lineage of filmmaking? And if so, could you elaborate on that tradition?
Sure, yeah. I think in general, though, my work has a couple different paths I go down, at least with the film work. Definitely more in what might be considered experimental or avant-garde. I like to think of them more as film essays, where I am, building on a long tradition, going back. One of my first main influences would have been like Stan Brakhage or Maya Deren is kind of two of the more well-known within kind of the experimental realm. And having kind of discovered their work amongst others really took me in a whole new direction from, at that time in college, primarily being a musician and a jazz music major, to wanting to drop that and start making films, because my soundtracks and what I was really interested in, artists, musicians like Sun Ra and Miles Davis, like, were just so visual. And so I really just wanted to create images that could go along with those sort of sounds. So that's kind of the tradition I'm going in. And then with some of the more video artwork that I've been doing lately, there's certainly a precedent for that too. But I love within these genres is that there is so much new territory and directions you can go in.
And we've got a question here noting that the work is fascinating, but are they meant to be ominous and cautionary, or is that due to my own overindulgence in dystopic science fiction?
I mean, it's hard not to really be dystopic lately. So sometimes, yes. I mean, sometimes I think they're hopeful. Generally, I want them to be contemplative, perhaps, and I like to leave a lot up for interpretation. And there's definitely certain themes and metaphors I might be trying to portray, but I don't want to come right out and say it either. So with my work, which is primarily short films, I like to have this kind of almost a narrative arc, but there's no dialogue or any direction, whether it be like a documentary with interviews or anything, nothing really telling you what to think or feel about it, but maybe leaving these impressions. So, but for sure, things like, you know, post-industrialization and capitalism and environmental issues, you know, these are all things that I like to explore, but as well as more positive things, I think also as far as like spirituality and things like that, so.
And we've got a question about the context that you most often share your films, galleries versus theater, for example, and also if there's a dream presenting institution or presenting form that you would want to work with.
Yeah, that's good. Primarily, I've shown my work, my film work, I like to show in theaters with people. Projected on film is really important to me, but you know that hasn't happened obviously in over a year now, and so I've adapted, you know, to doing things that I think present better online or digitally. I'm not opposed, you know, most all of my films I do transfer to digital, and I'm not opposed to showing that either, but I love the communal experience, especially with kind of like experimental type of work, to experience that with an audience and being able to talk about it after and exchange ideas. It is really interesting now how that space is moving online. And I don't know if it will ever go back to what I would love to just like show everyone in a theater my work or experience others' work that way. But there is hybrids starting to happen, which I think are interesting. And I know once we're all able to, you know, safely be together, there will be in-person screenings again, but I think kind of the online platform is definitely here to stay in a way that it wasn't before. So, you know, I just need to adapt to that, and I'm fine with that. And I forget the second part of the question.
The dream presenting institution or dream form, which might be specifically naming and putting it out in the world, like this is where I'm one day going to be sharing my work, or this is going to who's going to show up and say that they're presenting my work.
In space, like up in space, and maybe a holograph image that, you know, we can beam down here, or maybe even to show some other sort of life forms that are out there. What's going on? That'd be cool.
Love it. And yeah, someone, haha, NASA residency is is in the comments. And we've got a question about your technical process, if you could share some insights there. And I'm also curious if there's more you might share about hybrid presentation platforms or other things that you can imagine or that you see that are emerging.
Okay. Yeah, as far as my process, at least with the celluloid work, I generally think about my work a lot more than actually producing it, whether that be shooting it or the editing after. Like pre-production is like my favorite, like that's my safe zone. And I just want to like live in pre-production. But I think that film really lends itself to that too, right? Because it's, for a lot of reasons, I mean, it's a kind of a expensive medium to work in for sure. So you don't want to be frivolous with it, but you also can't really see exactly what you're capturing in a camera while you're doing it. You know, it has to go get developed, or I often do a lot of hand processing and kind of experimenting with processing. So I think about it a lot and just plan it out. And then that all the other layers as far as like what images to juxtapose maybe with music too, and what I'm trying to express, like that is probably like at least 75% of making a film for me. And then I go shoot it, and editing can also be kind of lengthy, but I love that process too. So yeah, that's about it.
And there's a question here also about whether you collaborate or generate ideas with others, or if you're building things mostly in solitude.
I think both. A lot of my larger films to date have been more solo, and I really enjoy that process. But like for the two kind of video clips that you saw there that had to do with like meditating in both cases, like that was a project that was a collaboration with Ben Altine, who is an amazing musician in Columbus, Ohio, and also happens to be my brother, so I can get him to do it. But we've had a lot of fun with this kind of series that we're creating, and being able to do that online, right? Not have to be in person and just kind of send files back and forth to each other. And, you know, as far as my solo work, when needed, I will pull in other musicians or camera people as needed, but I really like to kind of like get out what's in my head a lot of times on my own. So, but I love collaborating too, for sure.
And we've got room for more Q&A in the chat, but this means there's a space for a moment. So I'm really excited to ask a question, because you mentioned both spirituality, beaming things back down from space, and aliens. Is there any way that those might be drawn together in some sort of a hybrid platform that you imagine, or an overlap of those that you see in some way that you can share about? I'm really curious about those three items being mentioned in your comments so far.
What exactly do you mean by platform?
I really could mean absolutely anything. In some ways, I think of it as like a technology. Like if we could invent anything, what would that technology be, right? That's beaming something from space, et cetera. But also in terms of what the interaction might be, right? We're thinking about how might someone who's receiving the presentation interact with it? Are we chatting, right? Are we like mind connected? Are we in animation world? Like I'm just super curious about what that might be if you had all the power to invent.
Yeah, I don't know. Good question. I think, well, one thing that comes to mind that I like to explore in a lot of my work is like interconnectedness, you know, with all kind of things, like whether we realize it or not, you know, that here on Earth, we all need to live together, and we all are binded together in some way, you know, sentient beings in the environment, and it all kind of is in the soup, right? And it's to keep it an edible soup, we need to put in good ingredients, and like that's something that's really important to me. And I think that, you know, as far as the space thing goes, like, you know, my belief is like there must be something else out there, right? I mean, I guess it's my teen obsession with X-Files at the time, and even before, just as a kid, just always really loving space and daydreaming about it. And so, you know, there's stuff out there, and I think and that too, even though we don't realize it, even if you want to get into like one of my films, I think the second clip was called Unified Fields, and Unified Field is a term that relates to superstring theory and the possibility of like parallel universes that we don't even know about, you know, and just, so there's all these things out in the ether, you know, but I think ultimately my philosophy is like, it's kind of one big mesh, like one big web, and, you know, we're just a part of it, a very small part.
So a couple questions that have come up. One is related to how your own music might show up in some of your works, whether what we saw or in others. And there's a note that someone spotted finally got the news in the background, and wanted to check in on that about community collaborations.
Right. So yeah, my music, or maybe even more abstract, just sound work, I've featured in these films. And the ones you've seen, Vacancy, which was about the demolition of the Madison Lennox building in Detroit. And also Straight, which is my latest film. That was the one that had a lot of the shipping container and the ships, and the boat on fire, which was one of the old Boblo boats, if anyone was curious. I helped, again, some of the music in that, but also my brother Ben was the main composer in that. So I like to, as far as my soundtracks, they're generally more abstract and kind of more of soundscapes sort of thing, but that definitely works into my work, yeah. And Finally Got the News, yeah, that's a great book and a great movie too, that my friend Renee Lichtman was one of the directors on, that came out in the 1970s. About drum and labor movements here in Detroit. Definitely worth checking out. You can find it online, or I can send you a link if you're interested. It's a great documentary.
All right. Unbelievably, I think that we are having to wrap up, which is hard to believe because I don't know about anyone else, but when I show up to things online these days, I'm often like, okay, how much time do we have here? And this is the second artist salon we've done. I encourage folks to catch the first one if you didn't see it, with Kia Arriaga and Chris Jacob. And in both of them, the time has just like flown by, and that's saying a lot in Zoom land. I encourage each of you who presented today to please share information in the chat about how folks can learn more about your work. It looks like actually Layla is way ahead of me with some of those things. So you don't need to do that, except if there's more you want to let folks know about anything upcoming that you might have where people could see some of your work. Also, feel free to put that in the mix. And wanting to again, thank everyone for joining us today, including the folks who are providing support behind the scenes and creating the entire platform for this series and the format, Andrea and Layla in particular, and making sure that it all runs as smoothly as it does. Thanks to each of the artists, Paige, Brandon, Andrew, for preparing what you did ahead of time so that we could make the most of this time today and get to see as much of your work as we did. I'm lucky that I get to see your work ahead of time during the process of review and the selection. And still, I learned so much about your practices, and I'm so grateful for your sharing so generously today about your work and about the possibilities that we can create going forward, both for artists, but for all of us. I noticed a number of you mentioned paying other artists, and I just want to always put that out and highlight that in the work. Paying artists enough that they can pay their collaborators, even family members. I love that. I hope that that happens on behalf of your brother too. And looking forward, please keep an eye. There's going to be a link showing up in the chat already there, because people are amazing, to see the upcoming salons that are still happening. Also want to note that we just released the video last night about 2021 Kresge eminent artist Shirley Woodson. If you didn't get a chance to attend that event or watch the video, that exists, and please check it out. Another incredible artist who just received the Lifetime Achievement Award this year. Yeah, there's a lot of takeaways in this, and I wish that we had more time to explore the connections between them. I know, Paige, I was incredibly struck by something that you mentioned in terms of the context of creating work, but of thinking about where you're starting from and then where you want to end, and then having freedom in that middle part. And I feel like with each of your work, I'm really left with this idea about overall, both in arts and culture, but in who we are, how we're living together, where the world is. We know where we've been, and I think we can have a sense of where we want to land in the end, in a world that can be somewhere where we're all experiencing safety and full creative expression and abundance, and a place to to be able to do our highest and best work. And the question is, what are we going to do in the middle part? And how are we getting from here to there? And I thank each of you so much for sharing your work and for what you do day in and day out to inspire and to guide the path forward. Artists can help us imagine where we need to go so that we can show up every day and do that work. So thank you again on behalf of Kresge Arts in Detroit, the Kresge Foundation, the College for Creative Studies, for making the Film and Playwriting Salon a meaningful interaction, especially those of you who also shared all of the questions. Till next time, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.